tonight we have Colin, Brunton, and Kire here live in the studio. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
Glad to see you. And I wanted to also say I was so grateful to see that footage that you had of Teenage Head in our old studio, which brought back a lot of memories. It just, I don't know, it just sent a chill through my spine, but not others. I don't know, probably not others. But that was the first time I actually knew that you were working on a film, working on this film. In fact, I was reading through the old interview that you did with Greg about, I don't know, it was quite a few years back. And in there, you, Colin, you said that you were working on this film. That was you also that was I guess in 2009, 2010. I don't actually remember when we were transcribed. I know that it appeared in MRR in 2000.
I think it was probably 2008 because that's when I put the DVD of the last Pogo, the thing I did in 1978 out. So it was probably 2008. So when did you actually know that you were doing this film? In June 2006. That's when I started.
Okay, and let me ask you about the. Where did the idea for this film come from?
It was kind of a lark. I work in the business. I produce TV and film and stuff, and I thought my son Ollie was turning 13, and I thought I'd take the summer off and hang out with him and track down some of these old people from 1978, and it just kind of quickly evolved from there.
You mentioned also the idea about this camera and about like sort of getting some practice and using, I guess, people just catching up with them who were in the film, in the original film, right? Was that the idea?
Yeah.
So how did this kind of spiral? Who did you start interviewing, and then where did you start going, man, there's something here?
Well, one of the first people I interviewed was Kire, sitting beside me here, because he was still is the son of Chris Haight, who was one of the original Viletones.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that could be interesting. I'll go see Kire. And my friend Gary Topp had shown me Kire's film he made in college, which was fantastic. And we went to a GO station at Main Street GO station, and I think we lasted, how long did we last there?
Like 5 minutes.
And then we got kicked off by security because we didn't have permits, and
yeah.
They weren't keen on it.
It was a really bad interview anyways.
Yeah, it was terrible.
It didn't make the edit.
No, lots of stuff in the first couple of years didn't make the edit. And then I just kind of hooked up with Kire and said, do you want to do some shooting for me? And then, then 6 years later we said, enough's enough. I think we've got it.
Okay. One of the things that barely does make it in is the Cheetah Chrome, because you mentioned something about the Cheetah Chrome interview in the last interview. About filming him in a cemetery, and then I was looking through it today. I was like, "There it is, it's in there."
Yeah,
we were just talking about Toronto, right?
Yeah, we're talking about Toronto, and we actually have lots of interviews with sort of more international people. But we went through the edit. We just thought, let's keep it local. But Cheetah was kind of an exception because he was here so much. The Dead Boys played, the New Yorker, the Horseshoe. I don't know how many times they made friends up here. They got married to people up here.
Yeah,
and Cheetah came up and he was a great interview, and I reminded him that at the New Yorker, we carefully put together this dressing room, and the first day the Dead Boys were there, Cheetah and them kind of trashed it.
Yeah.
And he felt very bad about that, which was cool.
In hindsight, you mean?
In hindsight, yeah. I think they probably had a blast when they trashed it the first time, but in hindsight, he actually felt anguished.
And you said in that interview that you had a lot of you spent a lot of time like with some kind of acid cleaning off the walls. It was in the basement of the New Yorker. You're trying to turn this into
I had
dressing room.
I remember I had a bucket of what's called muriatic acid. And I didn't have goggles or anything. And I just kind of splashed this stuff in the brick wall, and it would clean it up. And ever since then, I've never had a sense of smell.
Surprisingly,
that might have been
or
what
not
happened.
Surprisingly, really. So let me ask you I wanted to ask you about the I was thinking that the Dead Boys kind of consider them, I mean, they were sort of like an honorary local band of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about, there's like only a brief clip of Cheetah Chrome, and I'm thinking, how much footage didn't make it into this film?
Oh man, like probably
because I'm sure you got gems like of stuff, right?
Hundreds of hours.
Yeah,
like crazy amount. Yeah.
What was some of the stuff that you wished people could have seen out of this film? Because when I've traded emails with you, Colin, you've said, this film could have easily been 5 or 6 hours, and even it's a long film, it's 3.5 hours, and I didn't notice the time I wanted to see more actually.
Well, I
in
guess
the theater,
I guess eventually we'll have when we get a DVD out next year, we'll have a lot of added extras or whatever.
Yeah.
But we've got interviews with Tommy Ramone, Hugh Cornwell from the Stranglers, Andy Summers from the Police, Adney Chernoff from the Dictators.
Wow, these are big.
And then all the people we did. We have so many takes. We had like a 6-hour version that we were pretty stuck on. That we thought that was going to be the final version.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I could see that, but the 3.5-hour version goes by like nothing. I think it's so well put together, but also tightly packed and edited. In fact, I was trying to follow it, and as I was rewatching it, I was trying to write notes about it, like how the storyline was being created, and I'm going, there's like hardly anything about the storyline, and there's so much more to this backstory, especially with reading Liz's book, Treat Me Like Dirt, you get that there's so much more to the backstory, right?
Oh, yeah.
In some ways, I think that these two pieces have to be sort of watched or witnessed as companion pieces.
It's we wanted to be thorough more than anything, and frankly, it was actually so much fun making it that I didn't really want it to end. It really became kind of like, okay, I got to eat, get a job, sleep. Oh, let's do some Pogo stuff, and then one thing would lead on to another thing. We kept finding more stuff, and then I would get pissed off and tired of the film. But then Kire would get excited about something, and then he'd get fed up with the film. But then I'd get excited about something, and then we finally just said, we gotta stop it.
Yeah,
it's good though to have a partner like that to feed each other, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it can be an exhausting thing, and it sounds like 2006, 2012, I guess, would have been sort of like more of a release, like when it would have been finished.
Yeah.
Probably that's 6 years. That's like a long time.
Yeah,
that's a significantly long time. So I wanted to go back and ask you about the significance of the Demicks New York City as the opening credit.
That was your idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably. Well, yeah, I guess it was.
There's so much to that, I think, that is excellent about it being an opening song. What was the reasoning behind it?
Well, I think it sums up the whole idea of Toronto. Is like you don't need to go, the message is right there. It's like you don't need to go to New York City. Everything is happening right here. I guess in their case it was London, but so you apply it to Toronto and Hamilton as well, right? So it just seemed, it's such a good song to open with. It's such a strong piece too, right? I think it really gets people pumped.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. I did feel like there's this message of the big city envy, and yet we had everything.
We had everything,
which your film really demonstrates in spades, I think, right?
Yeah, and it's like it's like when Ian Staines of the Demicks explains what the song's about. He says, it means you don't have to go to New York City. We got everything here, and we really did. I mean, I went to New York a few times in that era, and you certainly can't say Toronto was as exciting as New York, but this was a really rich scene, and part of the eventual movie we made was to kind of shine a spotlight and show people, can you believe this actually happened here? It was so rich with not just film, but, fashion, filmmakers, photography, and then just people having this crazy, liberated lifestyle for a while.
The richness was something I really caught of the film. When I came out of it, I was thinking, all this shit happened in Toronto. It's incredible. But doing a show like I do every week, I sort of get to drop in and out of one band or something from this era, and I don't really get to see it in all of its texture, all together. Watching it all together, I was thinking this film needs a soundtrack. I know soundtracks are kind of gimmicky things, right? They were something that tried to help sell films. But I was thinking, all these others, there's a whole bunch of city comps or country comps, like Killed by Death, Bloodstains across Sweden, Bloodstains across, all these different places. And I was thinking the soundtrack to this movie would be an incredible soundtrack on its own. And also just an incredible city comp that would has there been any thought to something like this? And you were explaining to me that there's some difficulties with this.
Well, for one thing, there's 52 songs, and just to deal with this was pretty. We had a lot of support from almost all of the community out there.
Yeah.
But basically, this was a 2-person show, right? And so to track down and do the paperwork and all that for 52 songs, and frankly, I don't know how well soundtracks do. not being selfish and just keeping it in the film, but it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we didn't go for government support on this or anything. Like, it's a really DIY out of your pocket kind of deal, except for the Canada Council and the Toronto Arts Council came in at the very end, gave us a bit of dough to help finish it, but it's a lot of work, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, frankly, kids watching the movie can make their notes. They can make their own playlist on iTunes, right? For $1 a song, they could make their own soundtrack.
But you know, the film does it in a great way. Like, there's nonstop music throughout.
Yeah.
And I felt like, I mean, I was hardly ever not banging my head or tapping my toe or just like, whoa, that's like, I remember, I forgot about that song, or like, so many moments like that with just the music in this film, that watching it was like a great compilation record. Just an incredible compilation. It's like, those like comps that you put together for your first girlfriend or something. It was so like that. Anyway, I just wanted to say the music that was put together for this was just insane.
Well,
Nonetheless,
thanks.
Just on its own. But I wanted to get back to the Demix song because some of the significant. I hate to. I don't want to beat this with a dead horse kind of thing, but I feel like the clips of the pogoing at the beginning, which is part of the title, is so offset. It's so different from, like, the song is so much slower and people are just jumping up. The energy it's like it just was like giving it so much more energy. You could tell that punk was like an energetic thing. Just the way it almost gave the idea that punk was ahead of its time, which is sort of kind of part of this storyline, right?
Mm-hmm.
That punk was so far ahead of the time that, like, the industry didn't know what to do with it. Like, the people who wrote about it didn't know what to do with it. And I was thinking, this fits with the storyline, like the significance of having the New York City, the Demix, New York City, the big city envy, all this stuff. And then I also thought, this is when I was a kid and I first got into punk. The Demix, the New York City song, is one of the first songs I ever heard. I heard it alongside of the Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, and the Stranglers, and Devo. And I didn't even know that they were a local band. And I was thinking, this is probably the best known song from this era, from this region. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think there's some significance to starting the film with. Like, I think there's a whole bunch of different significances to picking that song. And so I'm just wondering if any of these things played into it.
Well, I mean, we knew going in that we had, like, I don't think there's like a lame song in the whole movie.
No.
It's all really good, and it was exciting for us because we just knew that, like, no one outside of, kind of like the group that was around in those days really knows all this stuff. I was looking at Facebook like maybe 6 months ago, and John Worster from Superchunk and the Mountain Goats said, oh man, I just found like the greatest video. And it was like a rough trade video for High School Confidential. And I thought, so I actually got in contact with him and I says, there's a whole wealth out there. You think that's fantastic? So I gave him he was nice enough to look at the DVD and loved it. And the idea that we can actually turn people on to, like, outside of the Toronto, Hamilton, London, Southern Ontario thing, turn them on to some of the stuff, it's really gratifying.
Well, it's rare that documentaries, especially about music scenes, get to really capture the music, and I think you've allowed the music to speak for itself in a lot of ways, and I think that's like I don't think I've ever seen a music documentary do that. So
it's the best music documentary ever.
Well, I think okay, you can sit there and laugh, but I'm willing to agree with you, actually.
Oh, thanks.
No, like,
Mr. Perry.
No. I know that doesn't mean anything because I'm not really anybody. But I'm thinking when I'm watching this film, I'm thinking this is incredible. Like, this film is incredible.
Well,
so
thanks.
let's get into it some more. I not to be too self-referential, but back when Greg was doing the interview with you were chronicling. So I wanted to get back to the last Pogo roots to this, which was the original film. Greg was documenting. So you guys were talking about the film, you were sort of chronicling the story about the Garys and the horseshoe, and that's where the original event takes place.
Yeah,
the horseshoe.
Yep.
But you guys also spoke about the Roxy, the New Yorker, which comes out of that. The Garys meet there. A stage gets built. The Ramones come to town. This is the backstory to the film that never got told in the original film. was part of the reason why doing this film to tell this backstory, because really
Yeah.
it actually gives you the context now. Like the new film, the Last Pogo Jumps Again gives you the context to that first film.
It almost serves like as a prequel to the original film, because
For
the
sure
original
it
film
does.
took place in one night in 78, and this kind of goes back to I guess as early as maybe 73, 74, when things were clearly brewing in the city, and a lot of it had to do with Gary Topp. And I worked at the Roxy Theater as a teenager, and for me that was sort of like my college. Like I learned so much about music and films and stuff like that, and it's very exciting. And a lot of people that ended up in a lot of these bands hung out there and then went to the New Yorker. I remember when we stuck the I remember sticking the New York or the Ramones handbill up in the window of the New Yorker, and literally 5 minutes later, Stephen Leckie came by, and he was a regular at both theaters, and he went, yeah, I knew you guys I knew Gary would bring the Ramones to town. And so, and this is a time when, like in the mid-70s, Toronto was really dull. It was like a really boring place. And so, and there was like a thing that you could call the counterculture. So places like the Roxy and the New Yorker were these little oases of coolness, and that kind of continued to evolve. And after the New Yorker, when Gary met Gary Cormier, they formed this great partnership, and they just clicked. Like they're the best promoters the city had, and they went on to the Horseshoe. And I mean, you look at a Horseshoe handbill, I think we put them out maybe every 2 or 3 weeks or so, but it's like you can't find a bad bill on there. It's like it was amazing, right?
Yeah,
so it was kind of crushing when the owners kicked them out, and it kind of sort of felt like an end of an era, an end of some initial era.
They continued though, and they went on to do The Edge and also become like huge promoters in the city. Because I remember going. I mean, that's the only reason why I got to go to like find out about our local scene, was going to Gary's shows first, and then finding out about local bands, and then the same way that lots of people did. And we owe so much to the Garys for. I mean, even the next generations of kids that got into punk. I mean, that's the story that doesn't get told. But I mean, it's probably because. If you kept going, this would be like forever. This film would be on forever.
Yeah, we'll do the 50-hour version of the film one day. We'll release every single minute we filmed.
But this Gary storyline is an important storyline.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And watching this film, I mean, I wondered initially in the interview that you did with Greg, if this storyline was considered or not, because you told it so well in the interview, and I'm thinking, when you get into a situation where you're sort of doing an on-air interview and public discourse, or like there's like sort of this public discourse almost that goes on with radio, did the idea come out of that interview with Greg? Or was that interview before?
I mean,
did you have the idea before, like, of telling the backstory?
No, it definitely came before. Like, I knew that was a key part. That was a key thing, was the story of the Garys and Gary Topp and stuff. And there was a lot of other key things. So it was just a matter of how...
I guess that was the first time I was hearing about it, was on the show.
Yeah, but I knew about that since I was 18, right? So it was a matter of, when Kire got more into editing, it was sort of, we would discover different threads and things, right, and different stories. I mean, we have so much stuff, right? So
yeah,
yeah. But that was for sure. That was part of the thinking.
Okay, let me ask you about the storyline of film. So this is one of the things I was thinking about is that film sort of plays a prominent role in this film.
Okay.
So what do I mean by that?
Yeah, what are you talking about, man?
That sounds pretty weird, right? So yeah, sure. And I don't know anything, like I'm like, I've seen, a few punk documentaries about different scenes. Like we recently watched one in Chicago and the one in Boston. There's a quite a few coming out now. And I was thinking, they have different aspects, like the gay disco plays a role, the art school plays a role. Like there's lots of different things. But one of the unique things I think that is unique about Toronto is that film and the place that film occupies plays a role. So this is what I mean by it. The Roxy Theater, a theater that becomes like a place for kids to hang out. The New Yorker, the same thing. Then it becomes the place that the Garys meet up. It becomes the place that the Ramones play. So all of a sudden, film has a bigger role in developing the punk scene. They move to the Horseshoe. The Horseshoe becomes a space that you do this documentary in. Not too many scenes had a film about them in the early days.
No.
You know, there was Blank Generation. I think there was one at the Roxy in London, like in the early punk scene. And then there's this from Toronto, right? That's all I can think. I mean,
well, it's basically
that's mostly I can think
film,
of, right?
Film in the making films was so much more difficult back then because you couldn't afford it. And so one of the reasons that, you know, New York City and London, England may have had more stuff was, frankly, there was more people. So the odds are there's someone out there has figured out how to get a hold of some raw stock and some camera footage. When I did the last Pogo, I was kind of like willfully naive. Like I knew that I couldn't afford to really do it, and I didn't know how to do it, but I thought it was a good idea. And I just thought, you know, I'm just going to go do this thing. Somehow I'm just going to make this film.
Yeah.
And, you know, I didn't really...
It's just all determination, really.
Yeah, and that was kind of like, I don't know, this sounds kind of pretentious, but it was like, that was like the liberation of punk rock. It's like, oh, you don't know how to play your instrument? Well, just go ahead and do it. Well, you don't know how to make a film? Well, phone up that guy who taught that course to you. And so that's how I just jumped into it, right? And then, you know, frankly, I was in debt for years because once I shot it, then I discovered how much everything cost. We were lucky on this film because back in those days, a couple of clever people like Suzanne Naughton and Peter Vronsky had figured out how to. I mean, Peter Vronsky somehow squeezed money out of CBC to shoot a lot of punk stuff at Crash and Burn. CBC and their, you know, normal stupidity threw most of it out, but Peter let us have access to a lot of it. Suzanne Naughton, I'm not quite sure how she got the new Rose film together. Do you know, Kire?
She was the Ryerson student at the time, so it was like her one of her thesis projects or something like that. She's just like, I'm gonna go down and shoot some black and white of this stuff. So yeah.
And so they were great. So they were totally into like helping.
And there
us
were things
out.
happening like OCA, like they had like video, like really early videotape going on too. So, you know, you'd see like, you know, and there's things out there, some things we couldn't get our hands on, like Oh Those Pants. There's like shots of them playing and stuff like that, or there's like other things that we heard about. But, you know, it's I think the good thing about taking 7 years to make a movie is that you need that time sometimes to like just like fall upon things you didn't know existed. Like there were so many times we thought we'd be done, and then out of the woodwork someone would come along and be like, oh, by the way, I have some footage of The Curse, which was never heard of. Like The Curse will never, you know, and you know, then we get some 8mm, like, you know, really bad, like, you know, transferred stuff of The Curse playing at it must have been it was one of those. It wasn't Outrage. What was the other one again? My brain's right turning to shit.
Your brain's turning.
The one after Outrage that everybody was like more playing. Anyways, I mean
that is right. It's like you know, if this would have been like a properly financed film, i.e., if I would have got money from Telefilm and a broadcaster, it would have started in June 2006, and it would have been done by December 2006, and it'd be this kind of like short form, you know, bullet point of what the scene was.
Yeah, but kind of surface would be like, yeah, I'd be totally.
So, you know, we were lucky enough we had the luck, like, you know, the rule in independent filmmaking is, you know, fast, cheap, good. You can't have all three. So we wanted to be good. It had to be cheap. And so therefore it's going to take a long time. So, and the whole film scene was like, for me, I mean, a lot of the people that ended up in the scene, you know, really were, you know, regulars at the Roxy and the New Yorker, and they weren't just regular theaters; they were repertory theaters. And so, at the Roxy, you know, you'd show films like, you know, Roger Corman films, and you know, you'd see like old Hell's Angels movies with all these swastikas. Swastikas embarrassingly became part of the punk thing, but I remember interviewing Blair Martin from the Raving Mojos, and he goes, you know, I think the whole swastika thing came out of the B movies more than, you know, Nazi Germany. And then at the same time, at the Roxy and the New Yorker, you know, you're watching these B movies and kind of soaking up that kind of awesome culture, as well as, you know, watching Buñuel movies and, you know, watching Ken Russell movies and Kenneth Anger, and just getting like the broadest scope of culture. I mean, it was amazing to be there, because we seemed like anyone who worked at the Roxy or hung out there, like, you found out about stuff well before anybody. I remember one night, it must have been like maybe 73 or maybe 74, and Gary Topp had a picture of Brian Ferry, and he stood by the front. I used to take tickets there. There's actually a shot of little pimply long-haired Colin Brunton in the beginning of our movie, but I'd stand there and take tickets, and Gary's standing there, and he's showing a picture of Brian Ferry to a lineup of 500 people saying, if you can tell me who this guy is, you get in for free. And I don't think anyone got it, right?
Yeah.
So it was like mind-blowing. And so all those things are, you know, percolating in the back of people's heads. And then, you know, the kind of like the punctuation point sort of for punk was when the Ramones hit town. And then it was like they gave people permission to just go out and do stuff, right?
Well, Margarita Passion says in the film, when the Ramones played, it was like the world tilted, right? That was one of those great clips. There's so many great clips in that film, and you were talking about all these great pieces of footage. But I think you're giving me examples of like how film does become sort of this player in developing our scene. And, you know, even I'm thinking, like, to take this out of context with Steve Lucky, who, you know, has these pearls of wisdom all the time, and then also weird stuff. But, like, you know, the medium is medium is the message, right?
Yeah.
He's like, here's the city of
Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan. And I'm thinking, here we are using a medium that gives a message out to other people. I'm thinking, you know, people. I don't know how many people would have seen your film. I don't think it got great distribution, but nonetheless, we still had a film. We had a document. Like there's a document out there, video document of which there was very little else right out there at the time. And I'm thinking, you know, people in the scene, at least, like, that's something to play for, even in an environment, in a cultural environment where you're being ignored.
Yeah, and
I think there's a significance to the initial film. And then I think there's a significance that, you know, you get a second chance with this film, and you knock it out of the ballpark. And, you know, everyone, like, it's like the significance that really gets felt in this new film.
It's so nice for you to say. I mean, it was funny when I did the last Pogo, like, I didn't know how I was going to get the money for it. Someone said, oh, you should write a letter to this thing called the Ontario Arts Council. And, and I remember writing my note, and I actually said to them, you know, I think this movie would be really interesting to watch in 25 years. And it sort of turned out to be true. Like, I wasn't really I was sort of bullshitting them. I was trying to think of something to say to get $8,000 out of them, right? But then, weirdly enough, I gave the new movie to Craig McInnes, who was one of the very few people in mainstream media back then that would support this. He was probably more like 80s. He's not a reporter anymore. But he loved it, and he says, wow, this is really going to be something in 50 years. And I thought, oh man, you know, I'll be over 100 by then. It's like, I hope people see it now.
I'll be around still. It's fine.
You're lucky if you might.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the Forgotten Rebels with In Love with the System, which comes up at a great part in the film, and you use it actually to talk about the city a bit. You know, you're doing some things, and we were talking about archival footage. Mm-hmm. You were mentioning some things that kind of were very exciting to hear, because I didn't, you know, seeing that footage of like the violatones and the stuff with the crash and burn, the curse, seeing that footage of the curse playing live, that was insane stuff. And so, in some ways, I got a sense that this was like a real community project of sorts, right? Can you tell me a bit about like sourcing some of this material and what, you know, where some of this stuff comes from? Like, especially I'm mostly interested. I mean, it's interesting to see the CN Tower being built and all that stuff. That's amazing. And even the pictures of Mayor Dennison. But like, what's to me fascinating is seeing like this footage of like our first wave scene that was like almost virtually lost or like in private collections. So, how did you like? Can you tell me about where some of the sources for some of this material?
It was just, I mean, again, we got a lot of stuff from Peter Vronsky and Suzanne Naughton, but
like Steve Rasmussen he had, you know, he was smart enough to film like the Voltone's second gig ever at the Underground. So that was my dad's first show with them. And then you have things like, oh, I forget her name already. I'm horrible. She lives on my street, and she gave us the footage of the New Yorker, where you had the Dead Boys and the Voltones. And then you have like Anthony
Garamone.
Yep, who gave us the curse footage. 8mm gave us some.
And Anthony gave us the Demix. I think he gave us the Demix too, right? Anthony
no, it was a
Garamone?
different guy. Yeah,
was it?
Demix. Yeah, but so things like that, and there's also I mean, I have to go through all the footage again, but it was again, it like some of it like we knew about, it was out there, like the bigger things, but then there would be, again, you'd be like just, I remember I met Anthony, I was at like, I think, a Treat Me Like Dirt, one of those like book signings, record shows out in the East End. All the Curse were there, and he showed up and gave all the Curse copies of this footage. And I was like, hey man, can I get one of those? And then like a week later, he gave me a copy as well. So I think it was like also like just being right place, right time, and just meeting these people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think also people recognize that we weren't, we're honest, right? Like we didn't have money to pay people, but we weren't going to do anything stupid with it. We weren't like exploiting them. Like we're going to bring attention to you. And at the end of the film, our credit at the end is a movie by, and it me and Kire, and then it lists like, I don't know, 200 people, right? Because we just had so much help.
Yeah. It's amazing. Also, though, I find that it's a great film about Toronto in some ways. Like you can see, in some ways, like I remember the footage of Hamilton, like the sort of tourism footage of Hamilton.
That was Chris Houston. He gave me that. That was genius. Yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing, by the way. But also, you're seeing this stuff, and then you're seeing the commentary coming from the like how it was sort of viewed from the people who were there, from the punks who were there, right? Like the Mayor Dennison, who I don't know anything about, and I was like, yeah, he does have a Hitler mustache, and like he's it's kind of weird, like it's and then seeing having the CN Tower being built up while In Love with the System is playing in the background is just amazing. Like, I think it's amazing. Like, I don't know. You were saying this is sort of a love letter to Toronto of sorts, right?
Yeah, that's how I kind of put it to people. Because they ask, well, how long is it? And I go, well, it's 3.5 hours, 2-part. And like, oh, shit. And like, well, it's about the music scene, but it's more about Toronto in general and how it, what it was like and what it's become now. And, because even early on in the film, like, we show Queen Street West, then, and then we compare it to now where it's all like,
Yeah, well, you get this authenticity, like where I think that same guy from Johnny and the G-Rays is going, it's like really a place where the Rubbies used to hang out, right? It's
exactly.
Like, it wasn't, it was like all...
It wasn't Le Chateaus and like Lululemon and all that kind of stuff.
It was hardware stores and
like
porn
Queen,
stores.
Yeah,
and
Queen West was
bookstores.
like industrial kitchen supply places.
Yeah.
And then I think when Le Chateau popped up, I think that was one of the first signs, like, what's going on
trouble,
now?
right?
Like, it's trouble,
Gentrification's happening, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because you go to Queen Street West now, and it's like I was out last week, walking along there, putting up postcards, and I thought a couple of things. Wow, this is exactly what I was doing 35 years ago, because I used to make the horseshoe handbills, and I walk along Queen and staple them. I thought, man, I haven't really come that far. I'm like in my 50s and I'm doing the same thing. But then like you look at it and it's like, like you see so many traces of punk in that area, like the way people are dressed. I mean, I just noticed today a couple of people with like studded, like these nice studs on their boots. And it's like back in 1977, that was illegal. Like the police would not allow you to wear studded belts or studded wristbands and stuff.
I totally remember that because I remember them actually talking about I guess confiscating them at through customs and stuff, and Margarita's Passion was talking about how she had to sell them underneath the counter
rows,
but I had forgotten about that, and I remember when we were kids, we were like, "Shit, we got to go out and find wristbands because they're not going to be around anymore, right?"
Yeah, well, I remember,
but I'd forgotten. I completely forgotten about that. Like it was kind of weird, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty staid city, right? I remember when the Ramones came, and it was like, a little while after, it's like, oh, where do we get black jeans? You can buy black jeans in Toronto. And I remember one of our friends at the New Yorker, Helena, was the first one to have black jeans in our group of people. And it's like, where'd you go? Oh, I stayed up late. I dyed them. And then this place opened. Actually, it was a little place beside the Beverly that was the first place to sell black jeans in Toronto. But so you go there now, and it's like you can buy black jeans, but they're $400, and you can buy studded boots, but they're $600. So it's kind of funny.
It's crazy.
And now the weird thing now, I think, is a lot of the places on Queen West are now closing up. So it's like it may have peaked,
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Can you tell me a bit about the New Rose, because that place is and I guess its importance in the Toronto scene because that comes out a little bit in the film, and it's a bit like the Violet Tones Clubhouse. It's a place where the Curse go so far as to say, it defines fashion, like the fashion in punk for Canadians. Like they say, there was definitely a Canadian fashion theme. Like there was, Dr. Bork goes, they sold sweaters, right?
Yeah.
Like jokingly, but like, Can you tell me a bit about the New Rose? Because
I didn't go there a lot. I would go there to stick up handbills and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like a record store, clothing store, and a kind of a general hangout. I know some of the few kind of zines or whatever that were out back then would do their interviews there. And Margarita Passion, her boyfriend at the time was Freddie Pompey, who was the guitar player for the Viletones. So they were kind of like key to the scene as well. And just down the street from there was a speakeasy that people hung out at. The was it 404? Yeah.
On Power Street, I think. Or
no, they were on the Freddie and Margarita were on Power Street. 404 was 404 Queen East. And then actually down the street from there, even earlier, was the 505, which was Dan Aykroyd's club, who was one of the people we wanted to get a hold of just to talk about that because it was like really early days. We couldn't. But yeah, the New Rose was pretty vital, I think. It's like if you went to a normal record store, you might see, especially in like end of 76, early 77, you might see a half a dozen records. But if you want to get everything, you would go to New Rose, and they'd have all the singles and etc.
Okay. So the first film, you mentioned the challenges of the film being, money and not having enough time to do all this stuff. I mean, it seems like it took a lot of time to make this film.
It was just two of us too, right? Because because you'd get a lead, and I have to you'd be working, so I have to go track it down or something, or make copies, or and it's just a lot of back and forth that way too. I mean, another thing too was we had so many different photographers give us stuff, right? And so even just going through people's private collections of their stuff that they've never shown anybody, that takes time too, right?
Yeah,
and being well, can you scan this one for me and this one, and kind of that took days as well, and weeks and months, right? So
it would take months because they'd have old negatives. It's like, okay, we'll get a scanner, we'll come there.
Yeah.
Meaning Kire will come there.
Yes, yeah.
And then just go on and on and on, right? And like endless. And then, tracking the music rights wasn't crazy difficult, but because it's such a long... Well, some of it
depends on the band. I think the good thing about the scene is that since nobody really got signed, you didn't have to deal with big corporations. The biggest band was probably Teenage Head, really, in terms of dealing with any kind of real legal. Because half the time you'd be dealing with Mike Dent. Mike, give me a CD with your music. You're like, oh, okay. And that'd be that's easy, right? But then or even the Diodes. Luckily, I mean, Rolf was really cool, and it was one of the easiest probably bands to get.
Yeah, the Diodes, the Scenics, the Government were some of the first bands were just we get it. Here's the stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, but then for the Government, we've got footage of the Government, and so for us to clear that clip, that took a year of it doesn't sound like it's a struggle because I got to write emails all the time. It's basically all emails, woe is me. But,
no, but you could lose sight of these things.
You can lose sight of it, and you can get bored and just fed up. And with some of the stuff, with the Government footage, it's almost like you've got to explain how the whole business works. And no, you're not getting a back end because there's not going to be any back end to have. And so for that piece of footage, we had to go through the producer of the TV series, which, by the way, never paid anybody anything, and they never got paid to air it. It was this avant-garde TV show in Vancouver. So we had to go through the producer. We had to go through the camera operator for some reason. We had to go through the art gallery that curated all this. We had to contact the people the director and the estate of one of the guys that was involved that had died. And then we get notes back saying, well, how much? It's we're not paying anything. We want a minute. And it's and then you have to get friends. Oh, do you know this guy? Can you send him a note and tell him that we're legit and we're not trying to rip him off?
Right.
And so that's another minute of 204 minutes, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's insane, actually. When you think, when I'm starting to think, as you're telling us, I'm going, that's crazy. Because some of these things were not even that long, right? You're probably trying to get clear for a couple of seconds almost, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, we got to, and then the other people that got it, luckily enough, Truck Stop Women. We could have used, we needed some footage to show the Roxy, and so one of the kind of the obvious one we could have done was Reefer Madness.
Yeah,
and that was that's actually when I started working there because it was getting so popular that it's Gary needed someone to watch the door and stuff, and that stuff's public domain. Truck Stop Women's owned by this producer in Hollywood, but he was totally cool, and it's yeah, you can use it. Can I get the distribution deal? No. okay, you can use it. And, got the permission, right? Other people, it was like twisting arms. And a couple of bands, or one band, didn't want to get involved. They wanted tons of money for a song, and then they didn't like our interview and kind of sent us a note saying we don't want to be involved anymore. But that was like 1 out of
50.
Yeah,
or whatever.
1 out of 50. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's talk about history. Historical. There's a lot of bantering about where punk starts, as is often a favorite discussion in punk, especially in the Toronto scene. People talk about the Violetones. People talk about the Diodes are talking about their first show. The Dishes talk about actually Rough Trade being a predecessor to a lot of things. So I'm wondering what is because I didn't know much about where Rough Trade's role is in all this. And you mentioned about Rough Trade. Can you tell us about the significance that Rough Trade plays on the scene? And because they talk about like how they had this DIY ethic, and there's like androgyny. There's a whole bunch of different things about Rough Trade that set the stage for punk to happen, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, or for other bands to start.
I mean, first of all, I think their first gig was at the Roxy, and I believe Rough Trade then were called. Oh man, I'll remember in a couple of minutes. They weren't even called Rough Trade. Anyways, they were like an indie band. They didn't play bars 5 nights a week. They wrote all original stuff, and they were edgy. Like their persona, Carol's persona, back in those days in the early 70s was like, that's kind of out there for Toronto, right? It was kind of shocking. Sure. And they were a great band, and they did their own records and stuff. And so, they kind of opened that door a little bit to let people know, you can do this as well, right? Oh man, I'm gonna get stuck trying to remember their name.
Okay, well let me ask you. What I'm wanting to lead to is like one thing I didn't think about was that I didn't realize that maybe Rough Trade might have been one of the predecessors, right? I mean, people talk about the Dishes and their role, and so it started getting me thinking. A lot like with London, they often talk about the art school and the art school influence on the scene, and I'm wondering if Toronto follows the same trajectory. What was the role that the art school plays on and the art band, the bands that come out of
huge
the art school?
I would say without that, it wouldn't be what it was without the art, without OCA. It would be, yeah. So absolutely. So when I start thinking about punk and new wave, and I sort of associate new wave with maybe the art school in some ways, because I think new wave became something that came out of punk as a way that the industry could sort of sell punk to the mainstream a bit.
The thing, okay, here's the thing. It's
there's different constructions of this.
Yeah,
right?
and the thing, you can call some of those bands punk. Like you can say the Ugly and the Violetones were punk, and you could say that, those Pants and the Dishes were art school, clearly, but so many other bands were kind of their own thing, right? And it's hard to say if they're new wave or punk or whatever you want to call it. It was just... The thing about Toronto, and it might have been more similar to New York City than London, but it was so eclectic. Like there were so many different sounds, and there's so many original people, and a lot of them started a little bit before 76. Like I think the Dishes were around early 76, and the Scenics were bashing away at some place, and Simply Saucer and stuff. And it's like, it just kind of all sort of came together right around 76, 77.
But I think about these scenes in New York and London, and I think they had similar things. They had some, a bit of diversity, but I'm thinking we also had like the depth of diversity. Like there was so many bands.
Absolutely, yeah.
That comes out in your film. That's what strikes me is that, wow, look at all of them. Like there's so, you go on about the Dishes, the Government, those Martha and the Muffins, the precursor to Martha and the Muffins. There's the Cads, the Dents, there's the Androids. There's like so many of these bands. I'm just going. This is a bit head spinning of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And yet they all sort of get a little bit of space here, which is also I think was amazing.
Well, yeah, it's like what they all had in common is Ross Edmonds says from the Cads that these aren't bands that were going to be playing like your standard like Holiday Inn or like really kind of like fancy places. You had to kind of like you had to go and find your own place because this music, it was all vastly different. But
that's one of the great quotes of that because I was thinking that it's amazing that you have sort of like this this depth of punk, this big definition within a scene. And yet they still find the common ground to realize that they're still under the same banner. There's still a bunch of things that they're all trying to do together. Like they don't dissociate themselves. And then later on, you sort of get this division, right? This divide that happens. So can you tell me a bit about, well, I just want to, before we get into the divide, I want to talk about like bands like The Government. Who are The Government? Can you tell me a bit about them? Because they play a pretty
explain
important...
them. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Try
The Government.
I mean, I don't get to talk about these bands too much on our show because it's more,
Right.
more on the punk side.
The
right?
Government came out of A-Space.
Yes,
A-Space
yeah.
was one of the few kind of avant-garde art collectives in Toronto. They were actually like a block away from the New Yorker. And the main, like the lead guy was Andy Patterson.
Andy Patterson, yeah.
Very quirky guy who's still active in the avant-garde community. His main partner was Robert Stewart. Yeah, I mean, they were
a backing band at first. They did the music for the Hummer Sisters productions.
Oh,
right,
okay.
Which was actually in the film in our 6-hour cut probably, but it'll probably be on the DVD. So that's how they got into it. They were part of the avant-garde. Did you see those Hummer Sisters shows back in the day or anything, or like those?
I might have, yeah.
The Patty Hearst story and whatever else they did. So they did all the music for that stuff, and then at some point, Andy's like, well, why don't we just start doing our own thing as well, or break away from doing the Hummer Sisters, and we'll just start doing our own band thing. And The Government kind of came out of that whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about who the Swollen members were? Because I didn't really know much about them. And they have that great song in the film, I Like Living in Scarborough.
Well, that, yeah.
Which I think was also kind of a neat, because we talk about, that you start talking about like the influence of the suburbs on the scene.
Yeah, that was, I don't know who the exact brainchild there, but Evan Siegel was the lead singer of the Swollen members. He is still a friend of mine to this day, works in the film business like a lot of people in those days. And the first time I actually met Evan was when I was working at the New Yorker. And he came in, I didn't recognize what his persona was. He came in on a wheelchair. And I remember he telling me years later, I was sneering at him because I thought, this guy's not really, he's faking it. He doesn't need to be in a wheelchair. I didn't realize he's supposed to be Dr. Strangelove. He had this awesome sense of humor. And Swollen members were kind of like, in all original songs, but kind of like the comic relief. Like they had these lime green suits they'd bought on Bathurst Street that must have cost literally $40 each. Just these terrible leisure suits. And they did things like they had a 2-minute version of Inagata Devita, complete with drum solo.
Okay.
I've seen Evan do shows where he would just stare at his shoes for the whole hour. He would never look at the audience or do the whole show with his back to the audience. And at the last Pogo concert, like there's this riot going on. Like the people are throwing tables and chairs around. And Evan decided to be in character that night as Dr. Strangelove. And despite the fact that bottles are whipping by his head, he's in his little wheelchair trying to wheel himself out of danger. It was like, it was like dedicated.
Wow. Dedicated to the character, right?
Yeah, and they couldn't get airplay because of their name. The radio stations wouldn't utter the words Swollen members.
Oh, really?
On air.
Oh.
So they changed their name to Men of Song. But, then it just didn't happen, right?
Okay. Because I thought it was interesting. And I wondered about also this, could you explain to me, there's someone who in the film that says there's a difference between Yonge Street bands and Queen Street bands.
Yeah, that was John Ford from the CADs, basically.
So the difference is?
Well, I mean, Yonge Street back then was kind of like...
I got the sense that Yonge Street bands were sort of like cover bands and tribute bands, and they were part of the musician union and things like that.
Sort of, like a large part was that, but there was also bands like Max Webster and Gatto.
Yeah, okay. They did originals. Yeah.
They did originals, and I've seen some amazing shows by both of them, but then, I don't know, I remember we actually had Max Webster at the New Yorker, and they did a show. It was like great. I mean, the drum kit was insanely overblown. And it's like, okay, what's with this? And like they had this massive speed. Like it was like they thought they were playing at the Gardens. But the thing that bugged me was that when they did the second show, all of Kim Mitchell's ad libs were like word for word. I thought,
it's really staged. Then.
It's really kind of stagey. And I think people are just getting tired of, like they were, Gatto were kind of like glam rock pop or something. And then the other bands like were just a bit more original and a bit more daring, Like I don't think the bands, like some of them wanted to make money. Like I think everyone probably wanted to make money, but it certainly wasn't their prime goal. And I think bands like, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg Godowitz or Kim Mitchell, but I think bands like Max Webster and Gatto, this is like a career. We want to make money. But I think a lot of the new wave punk bands, so-called, were out there. Like someone in the CADS, I think, says, we were just interested in the next 20 minutes on stage. That was our thing. So I think that was a big difference.
Okay.
By the way, the original name for Rough Trade when they played the Roxy was the Bullwhip Brothers.
Oh, okay.
And that was Kevin Staples and Carol Pope. And that's from a text message from Gary Todd.
Oh, amazing. Thanks, Gary. So let me ask you about, have you ever seen the film by Lorraine Segato called Rebel Zone?
I haven't seen it, no.
Have you seen it, Kire?
No.
So
it's like the 80s Queen Street West kind of thing?
Yeah, it was completely, about Queen Street West and the art scene. And I saw it once on the CBC on Passionate Eye. It was like I think it was like a half-hour piece. And, she talks about like the art school and she talks about Martha and the Muffins. And, it sort of sets the stage for, I guess, where Parachute Club comes out. But it wasn't really about Parachute Club. It was about, the bands from Queen Street. So it was about the government. And anyway, I just wondered, okay, so I guess it doesn't matter then if you've never seen it.
No.
Because
Next question.
because I would have thought like there would have been some footage at least in that might have been useful for this sort of part of the scene.
Well,
the film.
we were trying to we weren't really strict, but we were trying to keep our parameter from September 24th, 1976 to December 1st, 1978. And we go a little bit on either side of that. Like it's not that, but we want to just keep that as the focus, right? So if you got into 79, then we'd have to get into like all the stuff that happened at the Edge and then how much bigger the scene got. And it's just like, we got to have some parameters here, right? So, and okay. I just thought the smaller time period and the more time you spend on it, I think the richer it is, right?
Okay. Let me ask you about the diodes because they're not really in the original film, but they do play a major role in this in the scene of sorts. They the diode's success. I wonder if you could attribute part of it to them straddling both worlds of the art scene and the punk scene, because in some ways they represented both. They were art school students, but they loved the Ramones. So in some ways they kind of embody a bit of both. And I'm thinking maybe that's why they were successful, even though it had more to, I think also had lots to do with luck and other things like that.
Yeah. I think they were also like, they were pursuing that too, though. They really wanted to be a signed band, right? And they kind of had their shit together than a lot of the other bands too, which had, definitely like another level on top of that, like Edge, you know what I mean? So I think a bunch of things, I think they were just, and part of it was luck for sure, but they were also like a safer bet, to sign. Like is Sony gonna sign Volatones with a guy named Nazi Dog, or are they gonna sign Paul Diode, right? So it's
for sure.
And they were a tight band,
and they talk about that too. Not in your film necessarily, but I've heard them. I mean, they've been on the show a few times, and they've actually mentioned that about the would your label trust a guy that was named Nazi Dog?
Right.
Probably not, right?
Probably not.
You'd probably go with someone else.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that's refreshing about your film is that it doesn't just sing the accolades of the diodes, which has happened so much, especially in all the interviews that we've done. So I'm, Paul Eckness of the Wads and Margarita Passion, they talk about, the pretentious character traits that the diodes have and how they just kind of rub people the wrong way. Can you?
Well, for one thing, we wanted this film to be not fair in like the politically correct manner, but we wanted people to say what they thought and not think we're sugarcoating stuff. So, there was a lot of resentment about the diodes, and partially it was because they became successful fairly quickly.
I think Ian MacKay says it too. Like a lot of it may have came from like resentment. Yeah, like maybe jealousy. It could have been like some kind of. I mean, they were also. I mean, I grew up like with my dad. Like I basically knew about the Volatones, Handhead, and the Diodes, and the Diodes were always kind of the band he'd always dump on.
A lot of people, frankly, a lot of people like. I didn't personally like the Diodes, and really it was only because I just could not buy the lead singer. I just thought I don't buy this. Like this doesn't seem anything near punk to me. Sorry, Paul. They were like a tight band.
That gets captured in the film too, right? Other people say that.
Other people say that. I didn't say it.
No, you didn't say it, but it does come out in the film, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder, this pretentiousness or whatever it was, the jealousy. There's lots of different. I think there's lots of different reasons for why people sort of galvanized maybe a bit against the diodes a bit. which gets expressed, I think, with the Violetones, talking about like this, he's like, we're not art school guys. We're like, we're punks kind of. There's a brief footage of Steve Lucky in the back of a house saying that, right? In your film.
Yeah.
And, that's totally a shot at the Diodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it could have been a shot at a bunch of bands. A lot of bands came out of OCA. I mean, it's funny.
But he even said in the film in the station with Greg in the interview, he said that he did with Greg here. He's like, one of the things I regret was being so hard on them, right? Like especially with Paul. Like he said, in hindsight, like now, years later, I wish like I wasn't such a dick to these guys, right?
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, a lot of people were dicks to a lot of people.
But at that time, I'm thinking, like I think the Violetones sort of embodied a bunch of the resentment that was against the Diodes, and they expressed it.
Yeah.
In some ways, they became like a voice for the scene, and they kind of
that was the thing. I mean, they talk about that as well. As like in a way, they felt it was unfair to them because now they're the ones that are actually going to tour across the country and represent quote unquote punk. Where back in Toronto, a lot of people didn't think they were punk. Like nothing wrong with that. They were more like they were a really good pop band, I thought, right? But when you have a band like the Violetones, or even more so like the Ugly were criminals. Like Mike Nightmare was a criminal. And he lived in him and his buddy lived in a tomb in Mount Pleasant Cemetery.
That was amazing, by the way, and weird, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, it's only weird if you don't think people can become invisible, Stephen. But he, But
I'm willing to try and practice that.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd love to be invisible.
I'm going to try when I leave here. But, so you got some of these bands who think they're more legit because of certain reasons. And then at the moment, I guess it depends. Like it was like one kind of big family, but then within this big family of 100 and 150 people, there was also these little cliques, right? And like everyone's buddies now, but like they say in the film, like Barry from The Exister says, like, what are you talking about? You two guys fucking hated each other back in the day.
Yeah, he does.
It's like, well, for one thing, you're young, right? So you can hate lots of people, and then you become a bit older and wiser and like sadly more mellow sometimes.
Yeah. Or sometimes not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still quite a bit of bickering, as you tell from the film.
For sure, yeah. But, I mean, how difficult was that? Because, like, there's lots of people here who are trying to, build their legacy of sorts, and they're also trying to, they're older in life now, they're a bit more mature. They want to mend fences and other things like that. And, they're also interested in showing the best side of that period of themselves. And you're kind of exposing, sure, here's the official story, but here's the other side of it, right? And you do that in a number of cases, like with the Violetones and with Teenage Head and with the Diodes, that's what I really appreciated about the film, is that it becomes like a real sort of look at the Toronto scene. It's warts and all kind of thing. But some of these people, I imagine, are your friends. So yeah, I'm thinking, how difficult was that to? I mean, probably as documentarians, you probably realize you got to do it that way because it's got to be an accurate reflection. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
But I mean, were you nervous when the film was first showing to all these people for the first time?
Oh yeah, man! I had a pant load for the cast and crew screening. Like it was like, yeah, I'm nervous. Like I know a bunch of these people, and
are they going to be your friends afterwards?
Yeah, and in a very friendly manner, we approached them, and then like one band just completely pulled out. But yeah, but you've got to do that. Like, it's not the Colin, Brunton, and Kire Paputts movie, right? It's a movie about Toronto punks. So you just got to live with that. And, like, when one of my friends from the scene saw the movie, like, he sent me this email and he said, number 1, great movie. Number 2, too long. Number 3, how the fuck did you not have the best band in the city, in the Fillmore? And it's just like, oh, man, like, I've known this guy for 35 years. I used to hang out with these guys, and then you just kind of like, there's still people that are pissed off at us ever since the cast and crew screening. Hopefully they'll get over it, and realize, look, at least people know about you, and we felt like we were being fair. Like, we don't think we had a particular bias as filmmakers. We wanted to kind of lay it out there, and warts and all is the thing. We weren't interested in doing the the CBC history of punk rock in Toronto.
Well, okay, so this, I mean, I appreciate it because I was thinking, when I was reading Treat Me Like Dirt, I was getting sort of more of the official story from like Ralph Alfonso and some stuff about the Diodes, and then you get this where it's like more of an accurate reflection of like, yeah, they were great, but they did a lot at first, but people didn't like them so much, right? And there's other things about them, so like I'm thinking, it's an accurate reflection as opposed to the more of the official storyline, I guess, if you could say. And I'm wondering if. So that's what I appreciated about it, because I was thinking, this is like it gets at it in a way, like, because I think, Liz, when she was writing the book, she kind of had to deal. I mean, Ralph was publishing the book. There's sort of there's some conflicts of interest there of sorts. It's got to be more of the official storyline, right? And she gets to it, but it's and you don't get it the way you get it in the film. And so I'm wondering. But I'm wondering also, because I've heard some different reactions to like people who've said, like I think Stephen Lucky might have come up to you after the film and said, "Great film."
8 out of 10.
Yeah,
8 out of 10.
So can you tell me a bit about some of the feedback that maybe was surprising? Because he doesn't always come off like there's gems in there, but he doesn't always come off great in this film.
No, I mean, after the screening,
so I would think that would be surprising. Like I was thinking, wow.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, we didn't know, like, again, even though we had tons and tons of help, for 6 years, it was like two guys kind of like working in a cave. Like, we didn't really know.
Yeah.
And again, like, I would get so fed up with it and think, like, this thing's terrible. And then Kire's like, no. And we'd go back and forth. So,
this thing is not terrible, by the way.
Well,
yeah, but I guess that's how you're feeling, right?
Yeah, and like when we went to that screening, it was like, I was really nervous, I was really nervous because I thought, we spent a lot of time doing this, but more so than that, like we're showing a film about a period in people's lives that was really important to them. And, they can't possibly see it the same way as other people do, right? Like everyone's got their own opinion. And so, it kind of hurt when people would get upset or say, hey, I think you're making fun of me or whatever. Or, no one ever said you manipulated us, and we didn't. But we're editing, right? It's like those crappy reality shows. It's like they're completely lies. It's like the way you cut it, you can tell whatever story you want, right? So, I think in our film we were trying to be fair, but you're still going to get people that are upset. And Stephen was upset, about the movie, but I think it was more the reaction he got from the audience that night at the cast and crew screening. It was pretty ugly,
Right.
I wouldn't have wished that upon my worst enemy. And it's funny because since then we've shown it a couple of times, and I've also in the last month or so sent out a lot of screeners to people. Haven't heard one people say, "Oh man, what an asshole," or about other people that may have felt slighted by us. It's just it was that screening. It was not fun for some people.
Okay, yeah, sure. I heard maybe Paul Manning from.
Paul Kovac, maybe you're talking about?
Was it maybe? It was someone from Teenage. Like
Paul Kovac was in the back, just kind of doing like a commentary the whole time.
Okay.
I mean, people were drunk, and it's like, and then people were telling each other to fuck off, and then the poor manager, like he's asking me what to do. So it's your theater, you run it, and he had to sit with Paul for the last half hour to keep his voice down, and for the first half an hour, it's like, holy shit, what's going on here? Yeah. And then it was kind of like, well, there's nothing we can do. It's like, this is what this screening is, right?
Yeah, it was very memorable. It was definitely like, there will never be another screening like that. I love this film.
If he's doing those vortexes. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, one of the great moments of comedy is like when Liz looks back at the camera and goes, with open eyes. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
As he's marking out grave sites and stuff. It's weird. But, I'm thinking, Steve Lucky, gets caught on film, calling for backup when, he's trying to start a fight, and he was kind of known for that back in the day, right? Yeah. In some ways, it was like, wow, how did you catch that? Like, that was really luck, almost like dumb luck in some ways. You got the camera running, but I think, it was like, that's an accurate. That's maybe that's not. I was thinking that was maybe one of the more unflattering pieces for him, because there's other times when he's like talking about Van Gogh, and I'm thinking, wow, like that's Well, no, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
that's like an amazing metaphor, right? In some ways, that's like that's part of the genius of Steve Lucky.
Okay, so the thing about shooting Steve that night in the coffee shop was that he was doing a big gig for the first time in years, right? Playing the Lee's Palace, and so it was just me that night. I just had my camera, and I was hanging out with him and Cleve, and went and grabbed some food, and Steve was determined to put this great show on, right? So then we go into this coffee shop, and I'm filming away, and here's the thing: it's like people act differently when they know they're being filmed. So Steven knew he was being filmed. This thing happened. I happened to have the camera right on him when this, frankly, this goof, spilt coffee on him.
Yeah.
And then Steve's like, okay, motherfucker. And so like I just turned my camera and I actually had that little dilemma, like, am I supposed to jump in here or am I supposed to just film this thing? So I just kept filming it.
Yeah.
And then I think the guys that were accosting, I think everyone came up.
Right.
The Diodes also become a story that mimics the Sex Pistols with their label, how they play the labels off each other, which I didn't. I mean, I sort of realized, but I didn't realize it until I really saw your film. And then then we watched Johnny Bubblegum, Jerry Smith from Tirana, also doing his thoughts on Shoeshine Boy, comparing it to the equivalent of our God Save the Queen. And, even in your film, we continue to sort of compare ourselves to these scenes that maybe in some ways didn't have as much going on as we did, but certainly did get the recognition.
Well, I think I'm sure people in England and New York would disagree, right? Have they made a 3.5-hour movie about CBGBs or London? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we just were able to get a bit more in depth and not just have sound bites. And that single was a big deal when it came out because that incident that prompted it was huge. Like that was a turning point for Toronto when Emmanuel Jacques got raped and murdered, this 11-year-old shoeshine boy.
Well, I think about the two comparisons. Like I think it's about the two examples. I think God Save the Queen. Okay, it's like about the coronation. It was the anniversary of the coronation, and I'm thinking, Shoeshine Boy is actually a serious scenario, right? It's a serious story, whereas God Save the Queen is just about pomp and circumstance and it's making fun of it. It's like a mock of it. But, Shoeshine Boy is actually like a serious, legitimate story. And the curse become like the target. And so, in a lot of ways, it's just like the venom of the mainstream media, just like it's another way to beat a punk.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the time, right?
Yeah, it was the Toronto Sun.
Punks at rock bottom. That's the
yeah,
line?
yeah, like that. Yeah,
right. That I mean, that was a moment. Like that's another one of these moments in your film. Now, Rodney Bowes also makes an appearance in the film. Explaining the diodes, photo shoot, and he also explains the curse. He gives like some context to the curse, which I thought was like amazing. How he just kind of summed it up,
Oh yeah,
one of my favorite quotes.
Italian construction workers,
equivalent of Italian construction workers. Yeah. But who's Rodney Bowes in relation to the Last Pogo? Because
the original Last Pogo.
Yes.
Oh well, he was a part of that scene. Like he was one of the photographers who I think was inspired by that scene and started really getting into it. A graphic artist and a photographer, and he was very much involved. And the guy's doing great now. He's based in L.A. He's he does really well. You can see the nice swimming pool he's got, and he's kind of stuck to his guns. I think he does stuff that he likes to do. So Rodney was like a key player back then, I think.
But I also think iconic, like because isn't this his picture? It's the cover of the Last Pogo soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
So, when I think of the Last Pogo, I often think of that picture. Of Ruby on
Ruby
here.
Tees.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like this, and it's outside of the horseshoe, and it's like it's an incredible photo, and I always I think of Rodney. I think of the Last Pogo, and I think of Rodney lots of times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was great to see him actually in the film, and also commenting more than once. So I thought that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get into the rivalry between Toronto and Hamilton, because it seems like you try to explore it a bit.
Yeah, that just came together. I think there's always been, Hamilton's always kind of been looked down on for sure. It's always a little, it's definitely more working class in Toronto in a lot of ways, right? And what I found as I was interviewing people in Toronto, or even growing up, like with my dad talking about bands from Hamilton, he always kind of like referred to Teenage Head as Teenage Hick, and things like that,
Oh.
which is not necessarily
Yeah.
the case, right? They were a great band and stuff, but it's definitely, I think it's just, as much as Toronto, like I think Steve Koch says, how can we respect someone who likes us, right? Or the idea of like Canadians feeling sorry for themselves. I think there's also a bit of pride though. A lot of people from Toronto felt like, especially if that first wave felt like they were on top of something and really cool. Like I think like Haas has said stuff like if you were coming in from like Richmond Hill or something to the Crash and Burn, like you weren't getting in. There was kind of definitely like a status thing happening.
Yeah,
at the
if
same
you're
time.
a lumberjack from West Hill.
Yeah, you're not getting into Crash and Burn.
But
right?
Hamilton was different. Like, 'cause Hamilton was like, I think to New York City, I think Hamilton is like, Hamilton to Toronto, I think is like New Jersey or something to New York City or whatever to London. And they always felt really legit. I don't know. I didn't really know. I mean, the thing they bring up in the film is talking about how you can't be pretentious in Hamilton. And I totally buy that. Like, these guys do seem less pretentious than some of the Toronto bands.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was really a rivalry, though.
Okay, maybe not a rivalry, but certainly there's like some, some feelings.
Well, of
There's
course,
like
because
a
everyone
sen-
hates Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone to this day hates Toronto.
But what's interesting to me is that I see that like Toronto kind of we talk about like Toronto being like almost invisible in some ways on this level, and then like we're doing the same to Hamilton in some ways, right? Like it sort of plays itself. It's like a chain that plays itself out. It's like a cycle of ignoring the scene, and it's also played out like with Richmond Hill, I suppose, or Scarborough, like because the Mods had to deal with that, and also Martha and the Muffins and Johnny and the G-Rays coming from Richmond Hill. That's sort of a little bit of that comes out in your film about the regionalism and how regionalism is a little bit of a factor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I mean, back in the day, like you knew Teenage Head were from Hamilton. I didn't really know the Mods were from Leaside, or I associated Martha and the Muffins with the Beverly Tavern and OCA and stuff like that. I think later on in the scene, that's when, like Johnny Bubblegum says, they started coming up from the burbs and stuff. And
yeah, because he was from Burlington, and he felt that from himself, right? He felt, because I've talked to Jerry about this, and he's like, yeah, that's how I felt. Like I felt like I was kind of lesser than, or not as, I wasn't taken as seriously as,
because he's not blessed with a 416 area code.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah, that's exactly, yeah. So that, to me, I wondered if if that made those bands like struggle harder in some ways, because Teenage Head become like like Ralph Alfonso at the end of the film says, this arguably sold more records.
Oh yeah,
they're more well known.
They have the platinum sales. They have
look at Teenage Head. They were hit.
Like when Teenage Head came here, they'd been at least practicing for years. So
yes.
When this kind of explosion happened in 76 and 77, and they showed up in 77 to the Colonial Underground, it's like, oh shit, like these guys know how to play.
Like since 75, they said, and they had already, like people were saying, they already had like a full record out, a full record of material that they could perform.
Mm-hmm.
They were great, and they sounded new. Like they reminded me of kind of like Alice Cooper's "Love It to Death" period. And then you had Frankie Venom, who was just amazing to watch. Like he was great.
Yeah.
That they're one of the, like they should have been huge. I think probably more than many other bands in our movie or in that scene.
Gary Gold makes that point. He said, "Here's a band that was ready to go." He says, they should have been on Saturday Night Live as like they should have been that big, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's like and then I started thinking about all the other bands. They were also really excellent, right? I'm thinking there were so many great bands. I mean, your film demonstrates that in spades. That's I guess what I'm saying. But to see Teenage Head as the example, and then sort of not get any kind of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Gordy says at the end, we never made a Juno, but then look at the Junos, right?
Yeah.
Which sort of said, I mean, there's lots of great moments in this film, right? But I'm thinking Teenage Head are one of these examples that are just amazing.
Yeah.
In so many ways, right? They were so great, and yet they totally didn't get any recognition.
What's also kind of funny is, you get back to your point about the rivalry. Like, arguably, I would say Teenage Head Forgotten Rebels, even Simply Saucer have probably made like some of the biggest dents. So like they're the like more known bands. Like Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth isn't dedicating sets to Stephen Leckie. He's doing it to Simply Saucer, right? Which is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
You know, Forgotten Rebels, you know, they're known South America. They've even played over in like Europe, right? They have a huge fan base.
Yeah, there's a film actually coming
Yeah.
out of Brazil, right? Out of Sao Paulo, I think.
I saw something a while ago that Mickey gave me of like it was like a really it was like some like weird feature doc some guy made really low budget, and he says
Yes.
he's just following people around who like Forgotten Rebels. He's like, yeah, he's down like South America, and then he's
The Blind Pigs from South America
Yeah.
have covered a number of Forgotten Rebels
Yeah.
songs.
Yeah, so I mean these bands are like definitely leaving like, you know, a huge mark, right, for
Yes.
the bands that aren't cool enough to be in Toronto, right?
This band from Germany is called the Nazi Dogs.
Mhm.
Right.
I don't know if you know that, but there's this
Yeah.
band that they put out
Yeah.
full length, and they're called the Nazi Dogs. And I was like, you know, we played a song when Steve Lucky was on, and I wrote them back, and they're like, oh, can you, like, they were so flattered that we actually played them together.
Oh, really?
I
Wow.
was like, yeah, can you tell them about how much we love them and all this
Wow.
stuff? Yes, I mean, yeah, and you know, Damien makes the point about the Bad Brains in your film, right?
Yeah.
Covering the Violetones, right?
Yeah.
Was it Possibilities, I think? Or
Screaming Fist.
Screaming Fist, and was it Nirvana? I think he talks about Nirvana covering Possibilities, maybe? Is that it?
Oh, we just used the clip.
Yeah, Stephen
Yeah.
talks about that.
Stephen talks about it,
Stephen
yeah.
talks about that, and then we found the bootleg audio
Yeah.
and used that. And then, you know, Damien Abrams
Yeah.
from Fucked Up talks about how there's all these, you know, people that cover Teenage Head and
Japan
China
and
and
stuff,
Japan
yeah.
and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I'll tell you, like, it's so typical that
And
that
not-
people
and-
recognize Canadians that aren't in Canada.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I was thinking, and not Red Rider, I think, which is what, one of the examples. in your film.
Alfonso, yeah. It's pretty
Which
good.
makes sense. I mean, I think, yeah, that's telling, right?
yeah. Yes.
Because those Loverboy and those bands were the bands that got played on radio, but, you know, Teenage Head should have been.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let me talk a bit about the crash and burn, because, you know, in the original story, it's not really, you know, it's about the Horseshoe Tavern. The last Pogo is about the Horseshoe. So what is the importance of the crash and burn in the storyline that leads up to the last Pogo?
It was the first clubhouse, really, right?
Yeah, it was
was
kind of
like-
like the thing that was dedicated solely. You know, the New Yorker had great lineups and stuff. The Colonial Underground was kind of off and on kind of deal. But, you know, when Ralph and the Dodds put the Crash and Burn together, it was dedicated solely for this thing and their friends. And I think it lasted 6 weekends maybe.
Yeah, like a summer, basically.
Okay, and who is Paul Richmond? Because he said he was 14 years old, he said, when he wrote this review.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, Dave Quentin turned me on to Paul Richmond. A nice enough guy, and I went and interviewed him, and and then he pulled out this essay he wrote when he was 14 that he got, I think, 16 out of 20 on it, maybe.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah,
15.
and
Not a bad
yeah,
Was that a school paper or something?
yeah, it was
it
a
was a
school.
school
It was an
paper.
essay about him being freaked out, going to the Crash and Burn, being freaked out by all these crazy people down there.
Yeah.
I mean, back then, like, we didn't, like at the Horseshoe, like, we never checked ID. Like, people came in that were 14, 15 years old.
Yeah,
and as
sure.
long as they didn't get drunk,
Yeah.
you know, we were fine with it. But yeah, Paul was he was a great little find.
Okay, other weird things. Rick Moranis of Second City throwing in this line about CBGBs, and I'm thinking this is like a nod to the Toronto Showcase that goes on at the CBGBs. How did you find out about this?
We
Because
just
I've never even heard of this. I
we
was
just
like,
dug it up. It's funny because, you know, this is what I do for a living now. I work on TV and stuff. And when SCTV did their shows, they didn't really know about music rights and clearing stuff. And so a lot of stuff when they got sold to NBC was just knocked out of the shows. And I think their reference to the Violetones was just so obscure that NBC didn't want to use it in any of the compilations. I think I just stumbled upon it on...
Wayne Brown maybe had it on a tape he gave you?
It was Wayne Brown, yeah. Wayne Brown of the Fits.
oh, the Fits.
Yeah, and he showed me it, and then again, that was another one of these things that took like maybe 8 months to clear the rights and convince them it was like legit, this is cool, and you know, it's a lot of meticulous. You know, you got to do shoe leather to make these films, right?
It's worth it. I mean, you know, it's not. It doesn't take a. It's not. There's not a lot of time in the film, but I was like going, wow, that's like what a cultural reference. Like Second City talking about this little thing that happened, like that. You know, means so much to us, but like, who the hell else would know about it?
Yeah.
And it becomes like part of a gag. I'm like on, like a big TV show. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also talk about other things. Like I was thinking, there's lots of insinuations about the B-girls and about their sort of bubblegum style of punk, and about how maybe they're not so legitimate. And at one point, Xenia is explaining about how they didn't even own equipment, and yet they toured with the Clash, and they even borrowed equipment from the Clash. And it's like, how could that be done? So there's like a demonstration of community spirit and other things like that. But as she started mentioning this, I started thinking about that film, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. And I started thinking about, initially I thought this film was maybe about the Slits, but then I started realizing maybe it's about the Clash's experience with the B-girls.
I've never seen it, but to back up a second, they were very legit. Like the B-girls were
of course, they had a single that came out on that label out of California.
They were like lovable and so much fun to watch.
Yes.
And, the fact that I remember seeing them at the Crash and Burn, I think it was, and at some point one of them looked a little sheepish, and Slash Booze, the guy who used to hang out with Teenage Head, had to tune her guitar for. I can't remember who it was, but they didn't know how to tune their guitars. But you couldn't not love the B-girls. Like they were fun.
Tunes.
Yeah, they had great tunes.
Well, in some ways, I mean, they embodied a bit of the Ramones spirit of like that bubblegum pop meets beach themes that the Ramones were. It was a trademark for them, right? So they were like a girl band doing this, and they were of course they were legit. I'm not. I'm saying that in the movie there's insinuations about it, and they talk about and it's sort of, it leads into some other things about sexism that get played out within the scene. But I'm thinking of this film, this Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, and I'm thinking, I think this is about the B-girls. It's not about the Slits. It's about the B-girls.
Oh, really? Eh?
And I'm thinking, this is pop culture playing to Toronto. And some are, writing about Toronto without people realizing it. I don't think.
I've
because
never
it's
seen it.
Like, people who know a bit about it read like this is about the Clash and the relation and like the Slits, and it's about like their the guy who's the manager, the dreadlock guy, Don Letts.
Yeah, Don Letts.
And so, because like all these people are characters in the film, and the Stains are this all girl band that don't have equipment and play with the band that's bringing them along, which is supposed to be the Clash. I guess like Steve Jones. It's like Steve Jones and Paul Cook from it's the Professionals playing, right? But it's like it was about the B. I'm getting the sense it's about the B-girls.
Maybe it is.
And I never realized it until I watched your film. Actually,
there you go.
Could be.
No. Well, I'm kind of putting these pieces.
We're just
together.
trying to educate you, Stephen.
But you didn't know about it.
Well, we secretly did. We didn't want you to know in this interview.
Well, it's a question I ponder. I think I'm thinking it's not just about the Slits. It's maybe informed by the experience that the Clash had with the B-girls here in North America. Right? So I'm thinking, it also anyway.
Could be like they were big, man. They went to New York and they had lots of friends and they did well, right? They had their own thing going for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, you've had lots of time to think about it. So we're starting to broach about the women and the roles that they played in the Toronto punk scene, and it wasn't like a secondary role. Women were prominent in the Toronto punk scene, and in a number of ways. So we talked a bit about some of the bands, The Curse, the B-Girls, 04, Tirana, I think it was the Dentines, Martha and the Muffins, the Cads.
No, Cads were all guys.
The Androids.
Yeah, Salicato.
There's bands. There's Margarita Passion and the New Rose. So we're talking about stores. We're talking about promoters like Gail Manning, who manages like arguably like the best known punk band from this region. Photographers, Gail Brick. Gail Brick. Her work is incredible.
My favorite, I think, of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at your. I think that was Eddie Steiner. But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff I've seen of hers, like in Treat Me Like Dirt, is insanely great. So I'm thinking, can you tell me a bit about like what made Toronto different, that women played such a that the space maybe the space was more more allowing of women to get into it.
I don't want to sound like a homer, but for all the people that were in that scene, that kind of community, everyone was pretty liberal, right? I think a lot of people were really kind of smart and liberal and politically correct when you didn't have that phrase politically correct. I don't think anyone had a beef about I don't think anyone in that scene raised an eyebrow and, what? A woman's taking a photograph? It was like, why not, right? And I imagine that would be the same in New York or London, frankly. I mean, I don't think anyone batted an eye. You know, it was natural. It was cool. They were great.
But it seems to be more of our scene. Like it seems like there's so many more examples I find.
Or maybe we embrace it more, or we talk about it more, maybe too.
Or maybe
it could be one of those things, you know, as it maybe doesn't get enough attention in other.
It's true. Maybe I don't have enough perspective about it because maybe I'm not familiar enough with London.
But I mean, that was definitely important on my end when I was editing to make sure there was a lot of female perspective put in there, right? Because
they're a huge part of it. And then you think of, I saw the CBG movies, and you think it was Blondie, and there was Tina Weymouth and the Talking Heads. Now, actually, I'm just thinking about this now. So, who else did they have down there? Like the B-Girls and the Curse were pretty radical, like just to exist. And it was exciting for the people in Toronto, but I guess we recognized it was kind of radical. It was an all-female band, but it didn't seem like gimmicky or a freak show or something. It's like, oh, cool, you know. You couldn't get two more different bands like.
Oh yeah, polar opposites.
Yeah, like the B-Girls were very sweet and just and they had their own background, but the Curse were like they were over the top. You know, they really would. You know, there's a footage of one of them sticking their hand down Stephen Lecky's pants when he's singing.
Yeah.
It's good times.
That was Mickey, right? Yeah.
I think it was Dr. Bork, actually.
Yeah, it was Dr. Bork.
Was it Dr. Bork? Yeah. Well, it's it's amazing shot, right? It's amazing footage. And to me they were like an example. Like there was lots of sort of like, I mean, Gary Gold talks about the Go-Go's. They could have been like the B-Girls could have been the Go-Go's or the Bengals, but I'm thinking the Curse. There was no examples of the Curse in other scenes.
No, the Curse could have been the Curse.
The Curse were unique.
Yeah.
To me they were the only one of their kind.
They were kind of scary. Like, I mean, you go to these shows back then, and I remember only a couple of bands kind of scared me. One of them was the Dead Boys, just because you thought like, wow, I think they could actually kill you or something or beat you up. But the Curse were like, wait a minute, like they really seem kind of tough, and I wouldn't want to mess with them.
No,
but they're also lovely.
Okay, I wanted to. I was a big CBC listener before watching the last time you did the interview with Greg. And then you gave me a lot of perspective on like sort of how the CBC did sort of this hack job on punk, which actually comes up in your film. And and I had seen this footage before, but not really paid attention to it. And you sort of gave me the perspective on, I think it was Hannah Gardner who did the footage. And, she went on to do this great career as an investigative journalist. But then like, I'm like going, she was like a hack. And so like, when it came to punk, maybe she knew some other things about other things, but like judging for what she did with punk and the hack job she did on the punk thing, like I'm watching her do this. She's doing this piece with Tina Shed and Frankie Venom in your film, and she goes and she tells Frankie, the only thing I really got out of your music was a headache, and Frankie almost feels bad for her while she's insulting him. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that's passing as journalism. And I'm thinking, are you kidding?
Well, it's
the last time you did this interview, you gave me perspective on this, and I'm glad you included it in your film. But can you give me an idea? Can you give me an idea of what it was like to the media environment was at the time? Because I don't know if we get enough of a sense of that. I mean,
well, that clip you're talking about when Hannah Gardner's talking to Teenage Head, she also talks to the Violetones about violence.
Yes.
The interesting thing is that was done in 1978. So the whole and it was introduced by Paul Soules. We cut Paul out of the film just because we had to pay a lot of money for that footage, so we had to keep it tight. But it starts off and it's kind of like, yep, here's this thing called punk rock, and they really just tossed it aside like, oh, isn't this kind of cute and interesting? There's these funny kids doing this funny, wacky music. That was 1978. The whole thing really was going on since 76 here. And so, they were completely outdated. And mainstream media didn't care. They just didn't bat it. They weren't interested, right?
Well, Lucky does a great criticism saying this one's for the kids in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
That was brilliant, actually.
It's a good line.
Yeah, there's very few people in the main, like Peter Goddard and at the Star was a supporter.
He was pretty good.
Stephen Davey was doing a lot of stuff apart from being in the Dishes. But
which I had no idea about. Which that was amazing to learn.
Yeah, but not much. I mean, when I finished the first movie, The Last Pogo, I almost had to give it to City TV. Like they brought me down there.
Right, you talked about that. Yeah.
And it's like, that was in 79. It's like, okay, this happened a year ago, and it was pretty cool.
And they sat on it for a year. Like, they didn't actually...
Yeah, well,
came back after a year.
They screwed up their contract with me. Like, I finally got fed up because they wanted it for free. And I said, well, I can't do that. And then a while later, I actually thought, I really want my parents to see this on TV so I know I'm not just like this stoned out cab driver. And so I approached them again, and they offered me like $500. And then I looked at the contract, and they screwed up. And they showed it immediately. Over the course of 5 weeks, they showed it 3 times, and their contract was up. But, I remember TVO aired a thing in 79 about the English New Wave scene. It's like they didn't even want the last post. So they didn't even want like the Toronto thing, right?
The Toronto perspective.
Yeah,
it's bizarre to me because they...
and then CBC, like Peter Vronsky is a really good filmmaker. He made a very detailed movie about the punk scene here, and he followed the Voltones and stuff down to CBGB's in New York. All this footage, they just trashed everything because they thought, well, this is crap. Like, we're never going to use this stuff. We would have killed for that footage on this.
I was going to ask if you ever got the chance to use that. So I guess
burnt.
Not. Yeah.
It's gone, in the garbage.
One of the things I was glad to see about was the interview with the Ugly, the radio interview, because I'd heard that actually, and I mentioned it to Greg. I think it's a half hour in length, and I'm wondering if you have that because I'd love to hear it again. I really...
we have it. Yeah.
Because when I heard that interview, it reminded me of... the Sex Pistols doing those interviews, I think was it Wood Guthrie, or there was a guy this old guy that they did an interview with, and it also reminded me of the Sex Pistols doing those product interviews, those radio interviews, where they just took the piss out of people. And I think Mike Nightmare, and they had such an incredible sense of humor in that interview. Mm-hmm. They played it as a like an archival piece, I think around the time that the Sex Pistols came back and did their reunion when they were doing the Filthy Lucre stuff, like 25 years later. And so it was like, oh yeah, well, Toronto had their scene, and they played this at a lunch hour on the CBC. And I was like, wow, I was like shocked that they were playing it, daytime at like 12 o'clock. And then I was shocked at how great it was. And then I, like I've known a lot of people who work at the CBC. I've been trying to get them to find this, and then no one seems to know where it is. Maybe I had some connections. But
that was just the radio clip, you mean?
Yes.
The only thing we couldn't get from them was the uncensored radio clip because they beeped out the F word when Mike talks about,
steal people's wallets.
Yeah. And he would have.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's good because that's the only time you really get to hear Mike's voice in the whole film as just like talking his perspective on anything.
Yeah,
right?
because people talk about Mike.
Talk about him, right?
The legend of Mike.
It's kind of nice to have that backup, like, oh, yeah, he was a pretty fucking badass guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they were also pretty funny. From what I recall of that interview, the sense of humor was pretty wicked.
Yeah. Well, it's even funny just filming them here, was it like 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
That was one of the best filming nights I had, I think. That was a crazy interview.
That was a phenomenal night. But I want something related. I wanted to ask you about the Toronto punk scene because it's one of the few zines that I've heard about from that era, and I think that was done by
Johnny Garbage Can?
Yeah, Johnny Garbage Can, right? Their manager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the zine because it's one of these unique documents from that period, right?
Yeah, I mean there was a couple. Like the slicker one was Gary Pig Gold's Pig Paper.
Yes.
And then
it came out more regularly,
and then
right?
the big one was Shades.
Right.
By Sheila Walwanash and
George Higdon.
Yeah. And that was thick. Like that came out pretty regularly.
Yeah.
We actually had interviews with Sheila, which was in the 6-hour version, but like her big thing was, I can't believe we thought people would read things in 6-point font. Like that was the thick paper, and it was like wee tiny little letters, right?
Yeah, they crammed a lot in there. Yeah.
They were cramming it.
Johnny's thing was like more hit and miss. Like he didn't do it that often, I don't think.
But it was a real cut and paste kind of thing.
Yeah, it was literally.
It was very like.
Yeah, literally cut and paste and hit a Xerox machine. Like take scissors and glue and tape, and then go to a Xerox machine or a mimeograph machine.
Whereas the Pig Paper, I mean, they were probably still cut and paste and Shades as well, but like I think it didn't look the part, whereas Toronto Punks kind of looks the part.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess again it depends on like the person itself. Like Gary Pig Gold's a lot more together than Johnny Garbage Can.
Well, he was doing it at nights.
As you can see in the film, right?
Well, Gary also told me that he was doing it at nights at his office, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think they were also sort of using resources, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you about. We don't have much time, but I gotta talk about the significance of the Ugly. Can you tell me about the significance of the Ugly in the Toronto scene?
You go.
Me?
Sure.
Well, I like how they like a lot of the bands now don't call themselves punk. It's funny, like it's kind of the label now, but because what are they though? They're hoodlum rock, right?
Hoodlum rock,
is
right?
that what Tony
Right.
was saying, right? It's
which I kind of almost resented because I'm like, you guys are punk,
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
they
but
were really punk.
but
like,
we were really
Yeah.
punk.
yeah.
They're probably my favorite band. I think like just for everything, like the music, the image, just like the sensibility to them. I think overall,
The
which is kind
attitude.
of which is kind of like hard, right? Because my dad was a Valtone in The Secret, so it's hard to I that was one thing too. Even editing the film, I try not to have too much of a bias, right? Obviously, I come into it with one, kind of. So yeah, but The Ugly for me, even I remember when I first heard that CD that came out in like the mid '90s, and it was just like insane, right? It's just crazy, like what and I'm surprised that it's not more known.
I mean, I got a feeling we're going to have tons of good added features with people telling stories about The Ugly,
yeah.
because we had some crazy stories about The Ugly, and then also about when Mike went out to Vancouver and started the Wild Things, and just some of the stuff that happened out there. It's just like, it's not even Spinal Tap-ish. It's just like, this is like extreme stuff, man.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
The significance of The Ugly, I learned that's the first time I met your dad, actually, because your dad came to that
Yeah.
night at the radio station, and the outpouring of sort of confessions about how great they were and how
Yeah.
they were everyone's favorite.
Yeah.
That's that's partially when I started realizing the significance of The Ugly.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
it's
It was the real deal, right?
Yeah.
It seemed like,
that's kind of
it's,
how
you
people
know.
talk about it. The
Yeah.
real deal.
There was one, I remember there was one quote, I think I got cut out, where it was Mickey Skins talking about how even like the Volatones was kind of like, still kind of almost like a performance or a stage thing, but then The Ugly were like the real deal. And I think Paul Agnes says too, like, there was like one true punk band in the city, and it was, The Ugly, which is like, a pretty bold thing to say, right? But in some ways, like, I kind of agree with that. It's kind of why I left it in,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So the Forgotten Rebels, who kind of stole the show in the first film, also make an appearance in the new film. One of the great, you capture some of Mickey's humor,
Yeah.
playing naked with the guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was great to see, and him talking about it's hard being an underwater welder.
Well,
Yeah.
like when we shot that was actually before, when we shot the thing of him naked, that was before Kire was involved. So it was me and my 13-year-old son.
Oh, really?
And my buddy Jim Morrow, and we went out there. I've got my 13-year-old son with me. We walk in there, and not only is Mickey, hiding his twigs and berries behind his guitar, but his whole floor was like covered in pornography and stuff. And like my poor son didn't know where he didn't want to look at Mickey, didn't want to look at the floor. And
He didn't know what to do.
He didn't know what to do, man. And
Yeah.
but Mickey is so nice. He's so funny, right? Like
Yeah.
I think he ended up being my son's favorite of all the people that we
Sure.
ran into. Like
Okay. Yeah.
he tagged along, but the guy is just so charming, right?
Yeah.
He's too much, but
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you. So I was glad to see you put the last Pogo in this film to provide the context. But can you give me just a quick synopsis? What was the significance of the last Pogo?
the last Pogo was basically the last big show that the Garys put on at the Horseshoe before they were asked to leave by the management. And so at that point, like it was the best club by far. It was like, it wasn't the only club. It was like the biggest, best club though, like consistently day in, day out, 7 nights a week, 9 months stretch, different bands every night, New York, England, tons of locals. And then it was gone. Right. And so, so that's what it was. And then when they had the show, it got really packed in there, and the drunken kind of detectives at the bar decided to shut it down. And so Teenage Head only did like one chorus of Picture My Face and left. And then the audience didn't know why they left, and they knew it was the last night. I also think they knew they were being filmed. And then it was just like chaos, right? Like literally people, like just like what you read about in like a Western, it's like people picking up tables and chairs, and poor Evan Siegel in his wheelchair trying to get away. And
you also talk about your regret being you were already out. And you were trying to beg
we were all
fire marshal
kicked
to come
out,
back
and
in.
somehow, my sound recordist managed somehow to stay in there hidden and recorded the sound of it. And I was just outside in That was actually the only thing I remember the whole night, being out on the sidewalk going, fuck, how can I get back in there?
Yeah, right.
I got to get back in there. And we eventually did and just showed the aftermath.
Yeah. Cause
so it was kind of a closing chapter.
Yeah, you sort of get a bit of the, in the film, in the original, you kind of get a bit of like the negotiation with Steve Mann, and I guess it was either the policeman or the fire department, whoever it is, the cops of the...
Yeah, we only just tracked that guy down. That was one of the other... There's a few people we never got to interview for the new film, like the novelist William Gibson we couldn't get, Dan Aykroyd sort of, but the detective who shut that show down...
You actually got to talk to him?
No, we only tracked him down last summer when we'd finished shooting already.
Oh, wow.
A friend of mine's father was a retired detective, and he became his pet project for like 4 days and found out who this guy was and that he was deceased. So we had no interview there.
Okay. What is the strongest lesson from the film? One of the strongest lessons from the film is this DIY lesson I found, and it's a powerful message that sets this doc apart from others. And what I mean by that is, like, the Toronto scene was basically on their own to make of their own, devices. They were left to be able to do it. What are the takeaways from? What do you feel that the takeaways are from this film?
Well, I think it's a very DIY film that matches the tone of the whole scene. I mean, it was just me and him. It kind of just mirrors, making the film kind of mirrors the whole scene in general, right? That's...
Like the thing with, I think the thing with punk when it came out was it kind of leveled the playing field. Like all of a sudden it's like, you don't need that huge drum kit like Max Webster. You don't need to play the bass like Gatto. You can do this stuff, right? So film was very hard to do in those days, lots of money. And now it's, in a way, I don't want to do like a glib soundbite, but it's almost like digital filmmaking has punked out filmmaking. Like now all of a sudden, like anybody can make a film. Like everyone knows somebody who's got a camera. And so in a way, I guess it came full circle. And we just spent, there's tons of great stuff out there that people do in their cameras, their digital cameras, and they cut them on their laptops. And we just did it for a bit longer and dug a bit deeper, maybe. Okay, so technology in some ways has become a great equalizer. Yeah. You've lived through punk in Toronto. What are your thoughts about the punk scene after having done this film? That maybe surprised you because you might not have spent the time with it until doing this film. I'm thinking like the film kind of gives you a project to do and to think about the scene in Toronto, and I'm wondering. What maybe something that you come out of this maybe not knowing before. The thing that came out of it that maybe I hadn't thought of before was that I knew kind of like how important it was to people back then, and I remember how exciting it was back then. And so the thing I wonder is, was it really that great, or was it that much fun because we were like in our early 20s? Like, does everyone have that much fun in their early 20s? And I thought about that a bit, and I think. No, I think it really was a special time. Like, I think it was like those couple of years, especially 76, 77, where I think like the cultural turning points of Toronto, where all of a sudden it was like, you know what, we can do better than this, and we can be a bit more out there and a bit more edgier, to use an overused phrase. I think it was a big, big deal, and I think it reverberated across Canada, I was talking to Nick Smash about this, and he said the same thing. He's writing a book about it. He said that every kind of music that is out now can be traced back to that era. He should come see our movie at the Big Picture Cinema, 1035 George Street East. He's living in England. He's living in England, but I'll put it out to him. How about that? Who is your favorite band from the period? If you could both answer this. My band was the Scenics. Yeah, that's easy for you. Gosh. Probably The Ugly. The Ugly. Probably The Ugly, yeah. Yeah. The Ugly. I was going to say The Government because I love Andy Patterson. No, it's kind of a tough question, Yeah. Like there's a lot of bands, but I became friendly with the Scenics and used to go to their rehearsals and stuff when I drove cab. So I'd hang out with them and smoke weed and get into it. Yeah, sure. I just got to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The film is so great, and like I said, I couldn't stop tapping my toe, banging my head, playing air guitar, air drums, whatever I was doing in the back seat, on the back row. I was just the film. I can't even believe it's 3.5 hours because it just flew by.
I can't wait to see this DVD. Can you tell me a bit about when this DVD might be available and how people might find it?
Oh man, who knows?
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
about this.
we don't know. It'd be next year sometime. Like we both have to. We got other
Okay.
projects, and
So
we have to make money as well doing gigs.
in the last interview, you said the film would be ready in 2010. So should I add 2 years to
so
that?
yeah,
3 years to that?
Yeah, so I don't know. Next year, no, for sure.
Okay. How can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more about the film?
thelastpogo.net.
Okay. And I just want to tell everybody in Toronto that The Last Pogo Jumps Again is opening, I guess, theatrically at the Big Center Picture Cinema. So can you tell me where this place is?
Yeah, it's called the Big Picture Cinema.
Sorry,
It's at-
Big Picture. Yeah.
Yeah, 1035 Gerrard Street East between Jones and Pape, and just 5 minutes away from where the Blake Street Boys hung out. And it
Yeah,
opens
that's right.
on Friday, November 1st, and all the info's on the website.
I used to live out there, around that area, and I used to ride by that theater, and I've never had an excuse to go in, and now I do.
Now you do. It's
Yep,
the
now
oldest
you do.
theater in Toronto. It was built in 1910.
The film's, I didn't know that.
Yep.
The oldest theater.
Dude, we're teaching you so much tonight.
It's crazy. It is crazy. So that's starting the Friday. Is it Friday,
Friday-
November 1st?
Yeah, Friday, November 1st.
And it's 7 o'clock? Or-
7:30,
7:30.
and then on Sunday there's a 3:30 matinee, and then on the Thursday, November 7th, there's no evening show, but there's a 3:30 matinee for $5.
That's a great deal.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
We're gonna go out with Teenage Head and Tearing Me Apart.
Perfect.
Right on.